Elira rose from the shadows, hood drawn low, face hidden. She moved like a phantom as she stepped forward and picked up the discarded sword. Her voice rang out like iron drawn from fire. "Leave the girl alone!" The two men turned sharply at the voice. The lead figure narrowed his eyes beneath the hood, dagger still at the girl's throat. "Run along, little hero." He sneered. "It's not your night to die." Elira's fingers curled tighter around the sword's hilt. She lowered her stance, her cloak whispering with the movement. "No," she said coldly. "The only ones dying tonight are you, if you don't let them go." There was no room for doubt in her tone. With a cruel smile, the leader shoved the girl away. She fell to the dirt and scrambled to her mother. "Fine," he hissed, unsheathing his blade. "Let's entertain the fool." They charged. Elira met them like a storm. Silence. Celine's breath came fast, her pulse roaring in her ears. But she did not back down. Her chin lifted, high as Mount Everest. "You no longer have such power over me, mother," she hissed. Her smile was venom. "Do not forget, I am the Crown Princess now." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "Regent," she corrected, each syllable said with icy precision. "And one more word from you, you will kiss even that title goodbye." A challenge, a dare. Celine's lips pressed into a bloodless line. The fire in her chest burned, but the ice in her mother's gaze was colder. For a long moment they stared. Queen and heir, mother and daughter, locked in a battle of wills, a duel without blades. Celine searched her mother's face for hesitation, for any sign she was bluffing, but found none. "After her coronation, I will eliminate the Queen. Quietly. Celine will panic, flounder. She will need guidance." He gripped the dagger tighter. "She'll find it, in you, her husband. You will be her compass." Dine's throat bobbed, unsure whether to be flattered or afraid. "You want to control the throne without wearing the crown?" "The crown is a gilded relic, weak, sentimental, a cage." He hissed. "I don't want to wear it, Dane. Let the girl play queen. Let Celine wear herself thin on ribbons and decrees." He stood before his son now. "But behind her, you will stand, and I will move through you." Makore. The name dripped from her lips like poison. "You slippery bastard." Every line of her body was a drawn blade, shoulders rigid, spine straight, the pulse in her throat the only betrayal of the fury coiling beneath her skin. She read it again. The words did not change. The proof did not vanish. Treason. Tonight's nightmare had been worse. Elira jerked awake, her single central eye snapping open, wide and wild, like a hunter ripped from the depths of a dream. She gasped, choking on breath as if yanked up from beneath the river itself. Her hand flew to her stomach, to the scar beneath her linen shirt. No blood, no blade, just the phantom ache of memory. Old Malu's bitter tonics had quieted the dreams at first. For weeks she'd slept without seeing the bloodied arrows from the ambush, Rezu's lifeless eyes, without feeling the cold bite of steel in her gut, or the river's icy grip. But tonight the medicine had failed. The nightmare had returned, twisted and strange. She saw her falling, the cold river swallowing her, and then shadows moved in the water. Not human, not water, whispering in tongues she couldn't understand. It had left her chest tight, her skin prickling with a dread she couldn't name. The room felt suffocating. She needed air. Silently she slipped from the bed, her boots soundless as she headed for the door. Jobel slept deeply, exhausted from another day playing the village idiot for the guards. She didn't wake him. Outside, the village slept. She walked the dirt path with her hood drawn low, her head bowed as if the night itself pressed down on her shoulders. Around her, the houses stood dark and silent, their windows shuttered against the world. Even the stray dogs that usually prowled had tucked themselves away. The night was hers alone. Foolish, her mind hissed. The guards still patrol. She knew that. She had walked these paths enough to learn the rhythms of patrols, the gaps in the guards' attention. The guards had grown sluggish, bored. 3 months of searching for a dangerous woman. 3 months of finding nothing. Just endless orders from some people too far away to feel their frustration. A cool wind curled around her, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant rain. She inhaled deeply, willing her pulse to slow. Her body had healed, mostly. The gash on her head was now a faint ridge beneath her hair. The wound at her stomach, once a gaping horror, was now a knotted scar, thanks to old Malu. Though the herbalist had muttered in awe over and over again that her healing rate seemed extraordinary. Moonflowers have tremendous healing properties, but this healing, not even moonflowers work this fast. Absently, she touched the scar beneath her clothes. Some nights, when the nightmare came, she would wake gasping, her hands clawing at her stomach as if the assassin's blade still sat lodged there. Tonight had been worse. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head, and instantly regretted it. A bolt of pain lanced through her temple, the world tilting for one nauseating second. She braced a hand against a wall, waiting for the dizziness to pass. Trade-offs, old Malu called them. The body healed, but the mind and the bones kept score. The headaches came less often now, but stress could still summon them. A vice around her temples, the edges of her vision blurring like ink in water. And the nightmare? Stars. The nightmare. The remnants clung like frost, its hooks sunk deep. The shadows in the dream, who were they? Why did their voice make her chest ache like grief? It felt as if her mind was trying to tell her something her waking self couldn't yet hear. Elira pushed off the wall, but as she was about to continue walking, a twig snapped. She froze for a heartbeat. Then quickly she turned to see 2 guards rounding the corner, their boots scuffing the dirt, their torch burning bright. She melted into the narrow gap between the miller's workshop and a stack of firewood. The rough mortar scraped against her back as she pressed deeper into the shadows. The logs, split and stacked haphazardly, reeked of resin and the slow decay of damp wood. For a breath, she was nothing but another shape in the jumble of darkness. Another damn night shift. The first soldier groaned, rubbing his face. 3 months of search every home, check every face. For what? Some noble's ghost story? His companion grimaced. Orders come from the capital. Governor says jump. The warden asks how high. The first guard spat. But there's no dangerous woman, no bodies, just us chasing our own tails while the warden lines his pockets. The second guard nodded. I'd say the river took her, but warden swears she's alive. Either way, we're the fools. At the mention of the river, a cold ripple crawled up Elira's spine, like the dream river's fingers brushing her neck. You're half right, she thought. The river did take me, but it gave me back. Her fingers curled into her cloak as she connected the dots. Capital. Governor. Warden. A chain of cowards, each hiding behind the next. But chains could be broken, one link at a time. The guards passed without glancing her way. She waited until their footsteps faded before exhaling, stepping back onto the path. Keep searching, she thought. You'll find me when I choose. She is not dead, not gone, just waiting. The wind rose again, colder now. It tugged at her hood like a restless spirit. Somewhere in the distance, an owl cried. She turned back toward the herbalist's house, but not before casting one last look at the eastern road, the one that led, eventually, to the capital, to Selene. Soon, she promised. Then, she vanished into the dark. The Queen's private chambers, draped in velvet and shadow. A low fire crackles in the hearth, casting flickering light over the gathered conspirators, the Queen, Selene, Lord Makare, and Lord Wuba. The air is thick with tension and the faint scent of rose oil and beeswax candles. The Queen sat motionless in her high-backed chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. The ruby rings on her fingers glinted like fresh blood in the firelight. Selene paced before the hearth, her silk gown whispering against the floor. 3 months, she hissed. 3 months, and not even a corpse to prove she's dead. She should be rotting at the bottom of the river by now. Why are we still wasting men on this? Lord Wuba shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jowls trembling as he mopped his brow with a silk handkerchief. Because if she isn't dead, we're all swinging from the gallows. The law still names her heir until the 6 months pass. If she crawls out of some ditch, Makare, the governor? The Queen's voice cut through like a blade. Lord Makare swirled his wine, watching the liquid cling to the crystal. No promising news. Every village warden has their orders. Search, question, repeat. If she's in Darai, she'll be found. Wuba leaned forward, his chair creaking. Then send your men. Have them blend into the villages, watch for her. A one-eyed woman can't hide forever, no. The Queen and Makare spoke as one. Makare turned his empty smile on Wuba. Strangers in the villages raise questions. Why new faces? Who sends them? The last thing we need is peasants whispering to Senavi's shadow walkers. The Queen nodded, her nails tapping the armrest. Click, click, click. Senavi already watches like a vulture. If she catches wind of outsiders scouring Darai, that bitch sees treason in every shadow, Selene muttered, throwing herself into a chair. She'll dig until she unearths us. The Queen finished, shooting her daughter a warning glance. She turned back to Makare. Light a fire under the governor. If his men grow lax, remind him his position hangs by a thread. Makare inclined his head. Of course, Your Grace. Selene scoffed. While you dither, I'm stuck playing regent to a corpse's crown. A log collapsed in the hearth, sending up a shower of embers. Makare's lips curled, a smile like a blade being unsheathed. Patience, Princess. The river doesn't give up its dead, but the governor will. Silence. Wuba swallowed. And if he doesn't? The Queen's fingers stilled. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. Then we remind him what happens to men who fail this family. The pale morning sun slipped through the narrow wooden slats of the window, painting Jobal's face in stripes of gold and shadow. It woke him gently, not with a start, but with the slow certainty of a man trained to rise before dawn. His eyes opened, and instantly, instinctively, they sought her. Elira lay curled beside him, her hair fanned across the pillow like a map of dark rivers. Even in sleep, her brow was faintly furrowed, the remnants of last night's nightmare still clinging to her. He had held her through it, his arms a barricade against the unseen horrors her mind conjured, until her whimpers faded and her breathing evened. Now, in this fragile light, she looked younger, softer, not a fugitive princess, just Elira. He reached out, tucking one of the stray braids behind her ear, his calloused fingers careful against her skin. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, a kiss so light it was barely there, but enough to make her settle, the tension in her shoulders easing like a sigh. Rest, love, he whispered. Then he slipped out of the room. Elira was still sleeping when the wailing, a woman's raw, keening grief, began. She jerked upright, the sound slicing through the last dregs of sleep. Outside, chaos, shouts, sobs, the thud of hurried footsteps. She scrambled to the window, her heart pounding. Below, Jobel carried a limp villager into the herbalist's yard. The man's back was a ruin of blood and torn flesh, his breaths a wet and shallow rasp. His wife stumbled after them, her hands clutching at her husband's dangling fingers as if she could tether him to this world. "They whipped him, like an animal," the woman sobbed, "for hiding a handful of grain under the floorboards, just enough to keep the children from starving to death. But they found it. They always find it. They said he was stealing from the crown." Her voice shattered. "How is it theft when the grain sprang from our own fields, when our children haven't eaten in 3 days?" Old Malu's son shouted for clean linen. Elira's body moved before she could think. She lunged for the shelf, yanking out poppy extract and bandages. Then she froze. "I can't be seen." The realization struck like a lash, the vial slipping from her fingers. Her muscles burned with the need to run out there, to help, to rage. But her scar ached in warning. One glimpse of my face, and the warden would finish what the assassins started. She staggered back, legs giving way, and slumped onto the bed. She curled into herself, arms wrapped around her ribs as if she could hold the pieces together. The wife's sobs, the children's hungry wails outside, they carved into her, deeper than any blade. Another life broken, another family shattered. And for what? A fistful of grain? The door creaked open. Jobel slipped inside, his shirt streaked with the villagers' blood. His eyes, always so quick to find hers, darkened when he saw how she lay. Wordlessly, he crossed the room in 3 strides, sat beside her, and pulled her into his arms. Elira pressed her face into his chest. His heartbeat was steady against her cheek, an anchor in the storm. Since they had come to this village, Jobel had watched the love of his life break too many times. Every day brought fresh horrors, families stripped bare, men beaten for crumbs, children with ribs like ladder rungs. And each time, Elira absorbed their pain as if it were her own. His arms tightened around her. But he wasn't idle. Not since the market. That day when he had seen the tax collectors smash a merchant's scales and walk off with his baskets of fishes and jars of oil, something in him had snapped. He had started to quietly monitor their movements, noted when they visited the warden's office, counted the ledgers they carried. He knew the warden had a main ledger, knew the guards' sloppy rotation. Piece by piece, he had mapped out the cracks in their system. He'd been careful, patient. But patience had limits, especially when Elira shook against him, her breath hitching like a child's. His fingers traced slow circles over her back. Tonight, he would repay the warden's cruelty. No more watching, no more waiting. The night was a living thing, a cloak of shadows and silence broken only by the occasional snort of a horse or the scuttle of rats in the hay. Jobel crouched low behind the tax warden's stable, his back pressed to the rough brick wall. The reek of dung and damp straw clung to the air, thick enough to mask his scent. Ahead the tax office loomed, a squat brick annex with a grime-streaked window cracked open just enough to let in the evening chill. Jobel moved like a breath of wind, boots silent on the packed earth. Pressing himself against the office's outer wall, he peered through the smudged glass. Inside, the scribe hunched over his desk, his quill scratching across parchment like a beetle scuttling over dry leaves. The man's fingers trembled as he inked numbers. Too many numbers. Double entries. No official seal. Just as Jobel had suspected. The scribe reached for a second ledger, this one bound in red leather, its spines creased from use, when the door creaked open. A young tax collector slouched in, his uniform dusty from the road. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of every grain he had forcefully taken from the villagers pressed down on them. His frustration mounted as soon as his hollowed eyes locked on the scribe, sitting comfortably behind his desk. "Stars! Your job's better than mine," the collector muttered, kicking invincible mud from his boots. The scribe snorted without looking up. "How? You ride about all day like some lordling while I drown in columns." The collector's knuckles whitened around his belt. "At least you don't see their faces, the way they beg, the children crying when we take their last grain." His voice dropped to a hollow whisper. "Tripling taxes, it's not right." Jobel's breath caught. This one has a conscience. The scribe sighed, rubbing his temples. "This again?" He shot a wary glance toward the door. "Don't let Uncle hear you." Uncle? Jobel's mind sharpened. The warden was their kin? Why are we even his nephews? The collector's voice turned bitter. "I can't walk through the village without folks spitting at my shadow. Even the dogs snarl at the sight of me." The scribe opened his mouth to respond, but the door slammed open, shutting him up instantly. The warden filled the doorway, his bulky frame blocking the lamplight. His gaze locked onto the red ledger. "Is it done?" he demanded. The scribe stiffened. "Almost, Uncle." "Almost isn't done!" the warden barked. "This ledger moves soon." He snatched the book, flipped through its pages, then dropped it back onto the desk with a thud that made the scribe flinch. His eyes flicked to the collector. For a heartbeat, his stern face softened. "You. How were the rounds?" "Good," the collector replied flatly. The warden studied him. Then, the scribe's exhausted face. Something like guilt flickered across his features. "Close up, both of you." He jerked his head towards the door. "Let's go grab something to eat." He jabbed a finger at the red ledger. "Make sure you finish this tomorrow, and no mistakes." As the scribe blew out the lamp, Jobel melted back into the night. His pulse hammered. 2 ledgers. The first was local. Fraudulent taxes, skimmed profits, every cruel levy the warden had imposed on starving villagers. Proof enough to hang the man if Elira could wield it. But the red one. That was the mystery. What secrets did it hold? Lists of accomplices? Orders from higher powers? It was being moved. But to whom? The governor? The capital? His fingers twitched toward his dagger. He had come tonight to steal the warden's ledger, to hand Elira a weapon she could wield like a blade against this corruption. But now, a cold realization slithered down his spine. Stealing it would be suicide. The warden would know within hours. He would lock down the village, tear apart every home until he found the thieves. They'd be flushed out, Elira exposed. Elira wasn't ready to run, not yet. He needed a quieter knife. His gaze locked onto the young collector trudging beside his uncle, shoulders still bowed. There, the weak link, the key. The boy's guilt was a crack in the warden's armor. And Jobel? He had always been good at making cracks split wide open. He had planned to steal a ledger. Now, he would steal a man. He exhaled, slow and steady. His eyes followed them until they were out of sight. Patience, he muttered under his breath while grinning mischievously. Time to make a new and useful friend. The road to Darai was a serpent of shadow under the moon's cold stare. 2 cloaked figures rode in silence, their horses' hooves muffled by the damp earth. Ahead, torchlight clawed through the dark. A checkpoint, where the governor's soldiers paced like starved hounds, their hands never far from their swords. "Halt!" A soldier stepped forward, his voice too loud in the stillness. "State your business." The lead rider reined in. A gloved hand rose, fingers curling slowly around the edge of the hood. Fabric whispered as it fell back, revealing Ama Tonde's face, sharp as a honed blade, her silver hair coiled tight as a serpent against her scalp. Her painted eyes reflected firelight like a cat's. The soldiers stiffened. They knew her, not just as Lord Makore's shadow, but as the woman who delivered messages that ended lives. The captain swallowed, stepping forward. "Mistress Tonde." He bowed his head, just enough to show respect, not enough to seem weak. "You're far from the pale griffin." She smiled, her teeth glinting like a knife pulled halfway from its sheath. "Lord Makore's business doesn't end at the city gates." From within her cloak, she drew a small obsidian tablet, its surface etched with a sigil that made the captain's gaze skitter away like a beaten dog. "Of course." He stepped back. "Pass through." As she nudged her horse forward, a young soldier, face still soft with foolish courage, frowned at the second, still hooded figure. "And your companion? They'll need to—" "Finish that sentence, and your head will roll," Ama Tonde cut in, tone cold, lethal. The young soldier's eyes narrowed at the threat, his fingers twitching toward his sword, until his comrade wrenched him back with a hissed, "Don't!" Ama tilted her head, her gaze locked on the soldier, unblinking as a snake's. "Do you also wish to see my companion, Captain? Or do you prefer your head where it is?" The captain's throat bobbed. He bowed lower this time. "My apologies, mistress." Her smile was thin as a razor. "Teach your pups manners." The captain nodded. The barricade groaned open. Ama Tonde and her companion rode into Darai, the night swallowing them whole. Behind them, the captain exhaled. The young soldier opened his mouth to speak, but earned a backhanded blow for his stupidity. The other soldiers exchanged glances. No one spoke. Not if they wanted to keep breathing. The bar reeked of spilled drinks and unwashed bodies. Yobel sat in the corner, the rim of his untouched cup hiding his watchful gaze. His target, Henrik, the young tax collector. Henrik was already 3 drinks deep, his shoulders slumped like a man carrying the weight of the village's suffering. For days, Yobel had studied him. The way his shoulders hunched after collections, staring at the grain sacks with hollow eyes. How he drank alone, swallowing his guilt with each bitter sip. A man drowning in guilt, with no one to pull him ashore. Tonight, Henrik had drunk deeper than usual, like a man trying to forget. His movements were sluggish, his laughter too loud at nothing. Patience, Yobel reminded himself. Then the opportunity he was waiting for came. Henrik staggered to his feet, knocking over his cup, and lurched towards the door. Yobel counted to 3 and followed. Outside, the cold air did nothing to sober Henrik. He made it a few wobbly steps before his knees buckled. Yobel caught him before he face-planted into the ground. "Easy there," Yobel said, hauling him upright. "No friends to help you home?" Henrik blinked blearily. "Friends?" He barked a laugh. "Those vultures I work with? They would piss on my corpse if it meant an extra coin in their pockets." Yobel guided him to a nearby wooden crate, steadying him as he collapsed onto it. The stench of cheap wine and unwashed misery rolled off Henrik in waves. "Then why stay?" Yobel asked, keeping his voice casual. "A man with morals in a den of thieves." Henrik's face twisted. "Uncle." He spat the word like a curse. "Family and all. But stars, I hate it now. It used to be a decent job. Back when..." He hiccuped. "Back when Elira was Crown Princess." Yobel went very still. "Elira." "Yes, Princess Elira. One eye, all heart." Henrik slurred, sketching a circle over his own forehead. People called her cursed, but she actually gave a damn about the common folks. Taxes were fair. No one starved. Now? He gestured wildly, nearly toppling off the crate. Now she's gone. Murdered by those fat, greedy pigs. Yobel's gut clenched at Henrik's words. The raw grief in his voice felt like a physical blow. This wasn't just drunken rambling, it was a eulogy for a better world. He was snapped out of his thoughts when Henrik giggled suddenly, a sound too broken for mirth. "My uncle is one of those greedy pigs, you know, tripling taxes while children go hungry." He paused. "I almost stole his ledger once. Thought if I got it to the capital, someone would care, would do something." His face fell, his tone laced with disappointment. "But then I realized that they're all the same. The governor, the wardens, even the new princess." Jobel stared at him. All the plans he'd made crumbled in an instant. Every lie he'd rehearsed turned to ash in his mouth. Manipulating him would be easy. But the raw ache in his voice, it mirrored Elira's too closely. Henrik was different. This broken, drunken man was no pawn to manipulate. He was a spark waiting for kindling. He crouched in front of him, eye to eye, voice low. What if someone did care? Someone who wants to burn this corruption to the ground. Would you help them? Henrik leaned in, wine-sour breath ghosting over Jobel's face. "You?" "Someone," Jobel repeated. A pause. Then Henrik nodded, sudden and fierce. "Anything to quiet the children's crying? Let folks keep their harvest, yes." "No matter what it takes?" "No matter." Jobel exhaled. Then he slid an arm around Henrik's waist and hauled him up. "Come on, let's get you home." At Henrik's doorstep, Jobel hesitated. The man was drunk, vulnerable, but his hatred for the regime was real. "Henrik." Jobel waited until the man's bloodshot eyes focused. "When you're sober, I need your help." A beat. Then, slowly, Henrik nodded. Jobel left him there, the weight of the unspoken alliance heavy in his chest. Midnight silence had settled over the village, a blanket of hush only disturbed by the gentle murmur of wind through leaves. But Elira, restless, had crept out from old Malu's house, drawn by the need to breathe without walls. Her footsteps were soundless on the soft dirt path as she wrapped herself deeper in her cloak, hoping the night air might still her racing thoughts. Then came the hurried footsteps, hushed whispers. She froze, her instincts sharpened. Like a whisper from her past, something wasn't right. Quickly she melted into the shadows beside a crooked fence. From there, she saw them. A man, his face drawn and desperate, carrying a bundle of clothes like it were a coffin. His wife moved beside him, holding the hand of a little girl who clung to her mother like a frightened kitten. Their eyes darted constantly, as if expecting monsters behind every shadow. They were fleeing, and they were afraid. Elira wouldn't have thought much of it. Times were hard, people fled to safer places all the time, but not in the middle of the night. Not like this. Not like prey. When the road cleared behind them, she followed. The family moved quickly, taking narrow footpaths, cutting through backways and bush trails only locals would know. Elira kept a silent distance, her breath measured, footsteps soft. She trailed them through a winding path that ended at the rocky slope toward the river bend. Then, suddenly, they stopped. Two figures stepped out from the trees. Black cloaks, armed. Elira stilled behind a cluster of rocks. One of the figures, taller than the other and holding a sword lazily in one hand, stepped forward. "Did you think you could escape us, Barek?" His voice was silk on steel. The man, Barek, trembled. I'm not escaping," he stammered. I came to see my family, that's all." His arms tightened around the bundle of clothes. The figure's gaze dropped to it. "Liar!" They began to advance. Barek's shaking hand darted inside the bundle and drew out a short, old sword, its edge worn but still sharp enough to show his intent. "Stay back," he warned, trembling. The second figure chuckled, stepping forward with a predator's ease. He lunged. Steel flashed. Barek swung wildly, but he was no warrior. The cloaked figure ducked the arc with ease and drove a punishing blow into Barek's ribs. He crumpled with a grunt, his sword tumbling to the dirt. The first figure strode forward and picked up the fallen sword. Without a word, he hurled it away. It skidded across the rocky path, landing a few feet from Elira, the blade gleaming beneath the moonlight. As if calling to her, Elira stared at it. Her mind spun. She wanted to stay hidden. She should stay hidden. She didn't know the full story, didn't know who these cloaked figures were or why they were after Barek. But then, a shrill, terrified cry ripped through the night. The little girl. The first figure had grabbed her, one hand clamped over her mouth, a dagger pressed to her throat. The mother was reeling, obviously struck by the first figure. That was it. Whatever business these men had with Barek, it had nothing to do with the girl, or her mother, and it had no place in her kingdom. Not anymore. Elira rose from the shadows, hood drawn low, face hidden. She moved like a phantom as she stepped forward and picked up the discarded sword. Her voice rang out like iron drawn from fire. "Leave the girl alone!" The two men turned sharply at the voice. The lead figure narrowed his eyes beneath the hood, dagger still at the girl's throat. "Run along, little hero." He sneered. "It's not your night to die." Elira's fingers curled tighter around the sword's hilt. She lowered her stance, her cloak whispering with the movement. "No," she said coldly. "The only ones dying tonight are you, if you don't let them go." There was no room for doubt in her tone. With a cruel smile, the leader shoved the girl away. She fell to the dirt and scrambled to her mother. "Fine," he hissed, unsheathing his blade. "Let's entertain the fool." They charged. Elira met them like a storm. Her first strike was a scything arc toward the lead figure. He ducked, creating an opening for his companion to strike. The second figure came fast, his blade arcing through the air, but she met it, her sword clanging hard against his. Sparks flew. He twisted, ducked, swung again. She spun, blade slicing air, and caught his side. A shallow cut, enough to draw a curse from his lips. The leader came from behind, blade aimed for her spine. She remembered the cliff, the stab, the blood. This time she was faster. She pivoted sharply, dodging under his swing. Her foot hooked his ankle. He fell hard, chin bouncing off stone. Before he could rise, her boot found his face. Crack! Bone crunched. His scream died as her sword plunged into his chest, silencing him forever. The remaining attacker charged. They clashed violently, metal locked and grinding, force meeting force. His strength began to overwhelm her. He pushed, muscles bulging under his cloak. Elira's muscles burned as she held as much as she could, teeth gritted. And at that moment, the wind blew. It swept past them in a whisper, lifting her hood. And her face was revealed. The figure's eyes widened in recognition. Her stomach lurched. He knows. Instinctively, she reached to yank the hood up. That mistake cost her. The figure shoved hard, slamming forward with renewed strength. She stumbled back, her vision doubling as pain rippled through her skull. The dizziness surged, her knees buckled. She blinked hard, forcing the world back into focus. Too slow. The attacker lunged, blade raised for the killing blow, and then a dagger hummed through the air with deadly precision. It buried itself deep into the back of the man's skull with a sickening crack. He froze mid-lunge, then collapsed like a lifeless marionette, blood spreading across the ground. Elira gasped, the world settling just as strong arms caught her. "Jobel!" He guided her gently down, checking her face. "Easy, love. I've got you." She looked up at him, breathless, vision clearing. How did you find me?" "I never lost you, never out of my sight," he whispered, brushing a few loose braids from her face. You think you walk these nights alone, but I'm always just behind you, the shadow you never knew you have." Her heart stilled. She smiled softly, then leaned in, kissed him deeply. "Thank you for always being by my side." Jobel smiled faintly, grounding her with his hold. A quiet shuffle behind them drew their eyes. The family stared at them awkwardly. The little girl, tears still wet on her cheeks, clung to her mother, staring at Elira as one would stare at a star. "Princess?" she whispered. Barek fell to his knees. "I never would have believed the one I helped mocked would be my salvation," he said, voice trembling. "Forgive me, Princess." "I am Elira," she said gently, stepping toward him. "And you don't have to worry about the past anymore. You and your family are safe now." Barek's head dropped low in shame. The woman clasped her hands in gratitude. The girl curtsied clumsily. "Thank you for killing the bad men." Elira smiled at her. Then Barek rose, urgency sharpening his voice. "Your Highness, I have vital information for you." Elira and Jobel exchanged a glance. The game is about to change. The heavy doors of the Queen's chambers slammed open with a force that made the candle flames shudder. Celine stood in the doorway, her chest heaving, her hands clenched into fists so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. The rage in her eyes was a living thing, hot, wild, barely leashed. The news had struck her like a slap. Marriage. To Marcoret's son. "You agreed to it?" Her voice was a whip crack in the silence. "You would have me marry Marcoret's son?" The Queen did not rise from her chair. She did not flinch. She simply lifted her gaze from the missive in her hands and regarded her daughter with the same detached calm one might reserve for a misbehaving hound. "Close the door," she said. Celine kicked it shut behind her. The thud echoed like a funeral drum. "Why?" Celine demanded, striding forward. "You know what he is. You know this is all he's ever wanted, to sink his claws into the royal line." Her voice rose, sharp with betrayal. "And you're handing it to him." The Queen set the parchment down. "Sit down." "No!" Celine's hand slammed onto the table, rattling the inkwell. "How can you be so blind that—" "Finish that line," the Queen said softly, "and I will have your tongue cut out this instant." Silence. Celine's breath came fast, her pulse roaring in her ears. But she did not back down. Her chin lifted, high as Mount Everest. "You no longer have such power over me, Mother," she hissed. Her smile was venom. "Do not forget, I am the Crown Princess now." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "Regent," she corrected, each syllable said with icy precision. "And one more word from you, you will kiss even that title goodbye." A challenge, a dare. Celine's lips pressed into a bloodless line. The fire in her chest burned, but the ice in her mother's gaze was colder. For a long moment they stared. Queen and heir, mother and daughter, locked in a battle of wills, a duel without blades. Celine searched her mother's face for hesitation, for any sign she was bluffing, but found none. Then slowly her shoulders deflated, the fight draining from her like blood from a wound. Forgive me, Mother." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. The Queen nodded once, but her voice held no warmth. "Marcoret is a viper, I know this." She leaned forward, her rings glinting like scales. "But vipers have uses. For now, we need him to secure your crown." Celine's jaw tightened. "Let him think he's won," the Queen told her daughter. Slowly she rose, her gown whispering like a drawn dagger. "Let him think his blood will smell the throne." Her lips curled into a venomous smile. "And when you are queen, We will cut his fangs out and put him in the place he belongs." Selene exhaled. The rage was still there, simmering beneath her skin, but tempered now, shaped into something colder, sharper. A weapon, not a wildfire. She bowed her head. "As you command, Mother." The private chamber in Makore's house glowed with the warmth of golden lamplight, soft and deceptive, painting the room in comfort where none truly lived. Heavy velvet drapes muffled the night beyond, and the scent of oiled wood and parchment thickened the air. Shadows danced along the walls, long, deliberate things, as if mimicking the quiet menace of their masters. Dain sat on a low stool near the hearth, his head bowed, his lean fingers working the whetstone along the edge of a dagger. The dagger gleamed, its obsidian hilt catching the firelight like a serpent's eye. Each slow scrape of the whetstone against its edge released a hiss that slipped into the silence like a warning. Across the room, Lord Makore watched him, fingers wrapped around a goblet of aged wine, eyes gleaming with measured approval. "She'll never accept me," Dain muttered eventually, breaking the rhythm. Makore's lips curled into a faint smile. He rose slowly from his seat and crossed the room. "She doesn't have to," he said, voice calm, deliberate. "Selene's pride will choke her. But her mother's leash?" He chuckled softly. "Far shorter than she thinks." Reaching out, he plucked the dagger from Dain's hand with a practiced ease and inspected the blade, turning it under the lamplight. The steel caught the glow, glinting with cruel beauty. "You'll stand beside her at the coronation, my son. Your silence will be mistaken for loyalty. And when the crown settles on her brow—" He turned the dagger in his palm, admiring its weight. "You'll remind her who forged the blade that won it." He turned, pacing slowly, his words deliberate. "I have played loyal servant long enough. Selene is reckless, a vessel waiting to be filled, and you—" He glanced at Dain, with something between approval and expectation. "You are the key to her. After her coronation, I will eliminate the queen. Quietly. Selene will panic, flounder. She will need guidance." He gripped the dagger tighter. "She'll find it, in you, her husband. You will be her compass." Dain's throat bobbed, unsure whether to be flattered or afraid. "You want to control the throne without wearing the crown?" "The crown is a gilded relic, weak, sentimental, a cage." He hissed. "I don't want to wear it, Dain. Let the girl play queen. Let Selene wear herself thin on ribbons and decrees." He stood before his son now. "But behind her, you will stand, and I will move through you." Dain said nothing. His jaw tightened as he looked away, eyes landing on the wall, on a painting of Elira, half shrouded in shadow. The canvas had been defaced with a cruel slash across the eye, the dried paint curling at the edges like a wound left to fester, a symbol of Makore's disdain. "And if the ghost of Darai returns before there is even a coronation?" he asked. Makore's eyes flicked to the portrait, his expression turning into something colder. He pressed his thumb to the sharpened edge until blood welled up, thick and dark. "Then we burn them all. The monarchy, the banners, the bloodlines. All of it." Dain's breath hitched at his father. "You'd destroy the crown?" He turned sharply and gripped Dain's chin. His fingers dug into his jawbone, forcing eye contact, dark brown eyes locked, one pair blazing, the other simmering with doubt. "If that masked shadow finds her way back into the light before the ink on the coronation scroll is dry, we'll shatter the throne, dismantle it. The people are already hungry, bitter at Selene's excesses. One spark, and they'll cheer the fall of every crown." A long silence stretched between father and son. Then Makore smiled again, faint and cold. "No more kings, no crowns, no more princesses with masks. We give the people something else, a new order, ruled not by blood or birthright, but by power, wealth, control, a council of oligarchs, led by those who've earned it, who've bled for it, who understand what true governance is. And at its head, he murmured, someone who never needed a crown to rule. Dain swallowed. The gesture was barely perceptible, but Makore saw it. He released him with a sneer, wiping his bloody thumb on his son's cheek like a twisted benediction. Pray Elira stays dead. It's cleaner that way. But if she dares rise... He turned, and in one fluid motion, whipped the dagger toward the portrait. It hummed through the air, a single, lethal note, before punching through the canvas with a splintering crunch, splitting Elira's painted heart. The blade quivered there, buried to the hilt, like a nail in a coffin. We'll burn the legend of kings with her, Makore concluded. The fire cracked, devouring itself. In its dying glow, Dain's face was a study in shadow. Makore leaned close, his fingernails biting into his shoulder. You are my blade now. A smile, thin as the dagger's edge. Try not to cut yourself. The silence stretched, taut as a garrote wire. Senavi sat motionless behind her desk. The candle on her desk burned low, its wax pooling like molten vengeance. She clutched a missive in her fingers. The parchment was creased from hard writing, its edges frayed, the wax seal already cracked. A hawk in flight, the mark of her swiftest shadow walker. Her eyes scanned the words once, twice. A muscle in her jaw twitched, her fingers tightened. The parchment creased further. A breath in. Then, her fist slammed on the desk, the sound like a war drum in the silence. The inkwell jumped, spilling black across the wood like spreading rot. She exhaled, slow, deliberate. Then she smoothed the parchment flat once more, her touch almost gentle, if not for the way her nails scored the surface. Makore. The name dripped from her lips like poison. You slippery bastard. Every line of her body was a drawn blade, shoulders rigid, spine straight, the pulse in her throat the only betrayal of the fury coiling beneath her skin. She read it again. The words did not change. The proof did not vanish. Treason. Her thumb traced a single name. A slow, terrible smile cut across her face. Clever, she murmured, but not clever enough. The candle guttered as she lifted the parchment, turning it slowly in the trembling light. For a heartbeat, she considered keeping it, preserving this proof like a blade kept sharp for the perfect moment. No, fire was cleaner. She held it to the flame. Fire licked hungrily at the edges, devouring names, secrets, sins. The light flared in her dark eyes, catching the hard line of her jaw. When the heat kissed her fingers, she didn't flinch. The last scrap curled to ash in her palm. Senavi opened her hand, letting the remnants drift onto the desk. They settled atop the spilled ink, black on black. Then, slowly, she stood. The chair scraped back like a knife being unsheathed. She crossed to the window, her boots silent on the patterned rug. Moonlight poured through the window, painting her in silver and shadow. From her sleeve, she drew a needle-thin dart, 6 inches of polished steel, its tip glistening with something darker than oil. She turned it between her fingers, watching it gleamed in the pale light like a promise. Soon, she told the silence. Her arm snapped forward. The dart split the air with a whisper, then buried itself in the far wall, deep in the portrait of Makore that hung there. It struck true, piercing the painted throat. Senavi smiled. Very soon.